Great, thank you very much. And I am here with two very important guests to discuss the resistance in the United States and what we're building internationally to prevent a thermonuclear war, which is the first step to moving mankind into a new paradigm. So I'd like to introduce Angela McArdle, who is the chair of the Libertarian Party National Committee, and Nick Brana, who is the national chair of the People's Party. And we will be discussing an upcoming action on February 19th. What I would like to do now is just present the strategic context for this rally. So, first of all, I think part of the problem that we're facing in the United States is the delusion. There's a delusional arrogance that we have to lay to rest. Not that a lot of people are not concerned about thermonuclear war, not that many Americans, maybe most Americans, are not suffering the effects of hyperinflation, the difficulty in just making ends meet. But I think people don't fully realize the difference between our nation, which we have been accustomed to thinking of as the best at everything in the world, the famous American exceptionalism. When we defeated the British Empire, that was exceptional. We were the first nation to defeat the biggest empire ever to exist on the planet. And the purpose of that was not so that we could replicate the crimes of that empire, but so that we could create a model of self-government that allowed the maximum potential development of each individual's talents, and not arbitrary talents, but talents that would contribute to the immortality of mankind, that would contribute to the greater good of humanity as a whole, which requires freedom, because it's there where your creativity is unleashed. Unfortunately, we very much lost our way, and I wanted to share some insights that I was really struck by in an interview I heard 2 days ago that was done by former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter with the notorious Russian arms trafficker, as he was labeled in the American press, Victor Bout, who served 14 years and 9 months in American prisons. And he reported on some things which I just thought would be of interest for Americans to know. One thing that Scott Ritter asked him is, what was it like returning to Moscow? And what Mr. Bout said is that he couldn't believe how beautiful and modern the city was. The streets were clean, everything was lit up, the stores were well stocked. And he described the situation of the Russian population now, as it's become very clear to everyone that the West lied, that the West was worse than people expected, that Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, and now even Boris Johnson have all admitted that the Minsk Accords were merely a fraud to buy time, to arm, to prepare for war with Russia. The illusion is off. The only opposition to what President Putin is doing is that people wish he would be more aggressive. But otherwise, the country is quite unified. It's very different. Compare that and think about that in the United States. Can you say that New York City is clean, infested with rats, with potholes that your car can fall into? Our nation, as Bout described it, he said the United States is flooded with drugs, flooded with drugs. And what does that indicate in terms of your care for the younger generation? Our young people, our children, are seen as sex objects for profit, not as potential creators for the future. And in fact, the other thing that Mr. Bout described is he said, the other prisoners were asking him if they could emigrate to Russia. They're so upset about the conditions in the United States the lack of a future, the insanity, the breakdown, that they would prefer to live somewhere else where you don't have this insanity. So I thought that was, in fact, a very useful perspective for Americans to reflect that what we are living in, the shape of our cities, the mass shootings, the mass insanity, which reflect a demoralization of the population, is not necessary. We don't have to live this way. We could be planning to build 6 or 7 modern new cities in all of that empty land in the western part of the United States. Or maybe even we should do something like the Chinese have done, build a new city somewhere a little ways outside of Manhattan, move everybody out so we can repair the infrastructure and move them back in. We don't think this way anymore. Instead of sending $112 billion to the most corrupt nation in Europe, Ukraine, for weapons which are flowing into ISIS, neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine committing hideous atrocities, or Boko Haram, perhaps we should be investing that money and building modern infrastructure in the United States to bring the United States into league with the BRICS nations, which, as I was just reading, now control BRICS Plus, now produce over 70% of the world's coal, over 70% of the world's steel, over 53% of the world's wheat. That's the reality of the planet. So in order to get to this new paradigm, there are 2 steps. One is emphatically stopping the war drive. And I would say there are 2 things to consider. One is that 2/3 of the world's population vehemently opposes having war with Russia or China. You see the difficulty that Tony Blinken is having in lining up nations to join our unholy alliance. Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina have all announced they are not going to send weapons to Ukraine. Brazil just said they're not going to send ammunition to Germany because they don't want Germany to send it to Ukraine. So most of the world is opposed to this action. In the United States, what I think we would find if we polled people is that the overwhelming majority of Americans do not think a nuclear war with Russia is a good idea. They don't think we should be arming Ukraine, that there has to be a way to get off of this. But how would that be visualized? How can we make that known? How do we get through to our elected officials? And to answer that question, I'm going to bring on our guests who have teamed up to organize a very, very important action, what should become a world historic action in Washington, D.C. on February 19th, President's Day weekend of this year. So I will stop there and allow you, I guess, Nick, if you want to go ahead and tell people what this is about.
I'd be glad to start. So I want to thank you, Diane, the Schiller Institute, for helping the host promote the action, Rage Against the War Machine, and you, Diane, also for speaking at the event. Great to have you. And so, as you've talked about, and as the Schiller Institute has been a leader in talking about, we are on the cusp of nuclear war as a result of NATO aggression, U.S. aggression, and an empire that is falling apart and going the way of so many empires before in a militaristic fury. The difference is that this time, unlike the world wars, unlike any kind of wars in the past, we have nuclear weapons and we have the power to annihilate ourselves. And so on February 19th, we are going to be going to the Lincoln Memorial, People's Party, the Libertarian Party, along with Action for Assange, many other different organizations, World Beyond War, that are helping to put this on. And we are going to rally at the Lincoln Memorial and demand an end to the billions going to Ukraine, demand an end to this war, an end to the war machine itself, the abolition of NATO, the CIA, the abolition of all of these appendages of war. And we are then going to be marching to the White House to deliver our demands to that demented warmonger, Joe Biden. And then after that, we're going to have a reception. We are going to have a film screening of Revealing Ukraine, produced by Oliver Stone. We're very excited for that as well. A couple days later, we are going to have actions in Congress directly, a sit-in. And so it's becoming a whole weekend of opposition of war. And I'm also very excited to say that we have sister rallies coming up all over the place, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in other places in the US, and internationally, which you were just telling us about, Diane. So very excited about that. There's the No to NATO March, which is partnered with us as well. That is in London on the 25th. And so this is really growing. A rebellion within NATO is growing against the forces of annihilation, against the forces of war, and saying that instead we need to build a world of peace to replace this war machine that is going to kill us sooner or later.
Thank you. Angela.
I want to talk about how important it is and meaningful it is that we have performed, we've put everything together through the lens of an issue coalition. A lot of people have come together from different political ideologies and different backgrounds to support this action, because this issue really transcends political boundaries. Our coalition spans a lot of different political parties and ideologies, because we're all, no matter where we come from, we all feel compelled to speak out against this war on behalf of humanity, because nuclear war affects everyone. Peace is for everyone. And even though we might all have a different idea about economics or how we want to get to wherever we're going, from a values perspective, we all want a future world that is free of nuclear war. We want a safe, prosperous future for our family, for our friends, and for the people who come after us. We don't want to live in the shadow of nuclear winter. We want to see humanity thrive. And that's why we've been able to set aside some of our other differences and come together. And quite honestly, it's been a wonderful experience. I think that we need to have things like this happen a lot more often, because it really helps us to kind of push past the tribalism that holds us back in so many ways. It's just so unnecessary, where we can really connect with people on a values-based level and understand, like, we're all part of humanity. We all want to move forward. We want what's best for everyone. And believe it or not, there are a lot of areas that we all agree on. So this is one of them. And it's pretty stark what we're up against, right? Like, this is no joke. We are dealing with NATO. We're dealing with some international alliances that are incredibly powerful, with a lot of money and political power behind them. But I'd like to think that there are more of us than there are of them. So I'm excited about this event. I want to invite as many people as possible to join us. If you oppose war, you are welcome and you belong here.
Great. Thank you very much. I think you may want to say a little more about the tribalism question, because people outside the United States might not quite realize how that works. And I would ask both of you for your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I'd say that the Libertarian Party is very much about free markets and individualism. That's our focus. We have a lot of agreements with the People's Party and some of our other sponsors, but we don't necessarily agree on economics or regulatory frameworks or even other particular issues of governance. And I'll let Nick, speak for his own. I'll let him be the best representative for his organization. But maybe some of this stuff doesn't make it into mainstream news. I'm sure that some of the fighting between Republicans and Democrats does, though. And you'll see that they're actually pretty quiet on this issue. They seem to be pretty much in unison on support of arming Ukraine and NATO and going to war. But us, people from the independent sector and from minor parties, like, we're in agreement on not going to war, and we have set aside like a lot of differences. Like, we'll run candidates maybe against each other, like the Green Party, for example. Like, they're definitely not ideologically the same as the Libertarian Party, but I'd like to think almost all of us are very adamant about opposing this action.
I
Except
would
that
agree with what Angela said. I'm very proud that we've been able to come together as, a party perceived as being on the right, the Libertarian Party, party perceived as being on the left, the People's Party, and show that issues of ending war, ending militarism, ending empire, abolishing NATO, the CIA, the deep state, all of that is not a left-right issue. As the People's Party, we really see that framework, the left-right framework, as an outdated framework that is used as part of the ideological control matrix to keep people from actually talking to each other. As Jimmy Dore, who's going to be a speaker, says, it's meant to make you hate and distrust your neighbor. Because then, as long as you're suspicious of each other, as long as you are hateful towards each other, then you're never going to actually look up at who's making the money from the war, who's really profiting. The military-industrial complex, all the private contractors, Raytheon, Boeing, and then the kickbacks that they send straight back to the members of Congress, FTX, all the money that they're making as well, top of the campaign contributions, the gifts they give them. They're the only ones profiting. We're the ones who are suffering the loss in civil liberties that are justified in the name of war. We're the ones who are suffering the billions of dollars that are being sent over there, or our taxpayer money that could be doing a hell of a lot of good here, where there are hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless, millions who don't have health care, as we see as the People's Party. And so that's what we see. But despite those differences on economics, some aspects of government, we are very proud that we can come together on those things that we do agree on, because this is really normative. In most of the world, there are which has a multi-party system. The United States has a two-party system, Democrats and Republicans, both completely owned by Wall Street and the war machine, And so here, as two independent parties, the People's Party and the Libertarian Party, really our perspectives are completely shut out. But in other countries where there are multi-party systems, it's common for parties that have differences in other areas to collaborate on issues where they agree. That's how you build coalitions. Of course, here in the United States, which is the heart of the world empire and the global financial, economic, military hegemony, they can't have people seeing through those ideological differences. So they had to construct a particularly isolating and atomizing social and economic system that is meant to keep us all apart, separated, and from seeing our common interests. That really, this is now a fight between a few people who are enriching themselves at our expense on issue after issue, especially the military-industrial complex, the endless wars, the war in Ukraine. And everybody else has a whole hell of a lot more in common than those few elites who are making all of the money, all the profit, endangering everybody's lives with a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll just conclude here, but we will be available for the discussion period. I would like to encourage people to actually write to questions@schillerinstitute.org if you can organize a sister rally and want to be involved in this, because I know we have listeners from around the world. And I would just like to say in conclusion of our remarks that Helga Zepp-LaRouche has put forward a document on 10 principles. This is very important because principles are unifying. Picky little details can be dividing. The first principle is the question of agreements among sovereign nations, that the sovereignty of each nation must be respected equally as we respect the sovereignty of individuals. You don't force people to do things, but you act through reason. The final of the principles is that mankind is essentially good, and I found that one tends to be the most controversial, but I would say that you can see that it is true because, frankly, Americans are not happy with the way things are going, which means that there is something internal already there, which recognizes that it is wrong for human beings to suffer as they are. And that conscience that exists in all of us, some people have worked very hard to suppress it and crush it and be nasty and perpetrate evil, but it's there. And that's what we must have faith in and also know that it's our responsibility to ensure that that goodness of humanity is allowed to come forward. So thank you very much, and we'll be participating in the discussion at the end of this panel.